I am really pumped up to see this many people in the crowd today. I couldn't believe the numbers when they kept going up. You know, last year we did a best practices. The year before that we did a best practices. And throughout the comments, all we get is more like this. You know, give us more best practices, go deeper. So this year we're going to go deeper. This year you're going to get more best practices. And this year it's going to be even more fantastic. Hopefully. So this is your 5-minute warning. If you've walked into this room thinking, I don't even know what PowerCLI is, I think I might go in this session, you have 5 minutes, okay? We'll turn around. We won't look at you. We don't care who leaves. We won't get offended. But this is a deep dive session. We might go through the very, very basics right at the start for like 2 slides, fly straight through it. But if you're coming to this session thinking you might want to learn about PowerCLI, this is not the right session for you. It's a deep dive session. No one's leaving. Yeah. This is a good start. Okay. If you are after a quick what's new in PowerCLI 5.5 or more about how do I get started in PowerCLI, then there are sessions about that, and I will be presenting about that, so please do join those sessions. The 5.5, the what's new in 5.5, there's a great demo at the end of that one. I'm really excited to do that one as well.
Okay, good morning from me as well. Most of you, of course, all know Alan, since we've been here for a couple of years. Alan now works for VMware. He has been a vExpert for years, rightly so. He has a blog on the VMware side as well. And he has his own personal blog, which you all frequently visit. And you know his Twitter account, which you should be subscribed to in any case.
Thanks, Luc. So I normally do the joke about the communities and how anybody that's raised a question on the communities will know Luc because he's the guy that answers it within a couple of minutes. I'm not going to do that one today. In the short, everybody knows Luc Deakins. You've probably been to his blog. You've definitely seen him on the communities if you've raised a question there. He's a vExpert and a newly announced PowerShell MVP this year, everybody. Well done, Luc.
Thanks.
His VMTN account is Luc D. All those guys that said you buy him a beer at VMworld, he's going to get drunk tonight.
I leave on Friday, so...
It's only Belgian beer, though.
Yeah,
right?
okay.
And he's LucD22 on Twitter. So as I said, the introduction, you've been through the keynote this morning. We're going to go through PowerCLI real quick. But first of all, this is the third type of session that we've done like this, the third best practices session. We're going to go deeper, as I explained, again this year. But as you go through this, remember, you might be doing things a different way. That's fine. We're going to show you some of the tips and tricks that we've come up with. It's all based around the community as well. So we've taken a look at the community for this deck, and we've seen, you know, what are the common questions that are coming up, and how would we answer those? You know, how can we tell people how to do things easier, how to do them better, how to do them faster, make your lives easier, make it easier to learn this stuff. There's never one way to do this stuff. So, you know, if you do have your own examples, don't worry about it. You're doing it right. If you get the results, you're doing it right. So the PowerCLI community as it stands is absolutely huge. It amazes me, you know, how helpful everybody is, first of all, on there. If you're new to PowerCLI, you go on there, you raise a question, you get it answered within a couple of minutes. And it doesn't matter if you're new. Nobody's got any prejudice against you. You know, these guys have been learning it for a while. There's guys that are just starting out. It's a great place to start. If you Google PowerCLI community, you'll find it straight away. There's a bunch of people in the community. As we go through our decks today, you'll see a surprising amount of people you didn't know were in the community. So the session today, as I said, is taking you from the beginner and giving you all the best practices to turn you guys into an expert on PowerCLI.
Okay, I don't know why this guy always keeps popping up in our sessions, but apparently he's famous somewhere. Although Alan said that we don't do is an introduction to PowerCLI, there's a 2-slide coming up now. It's a 2-minute overview of what is PowerCLI about. So first of all, why PowerCLI? It's based on PowerShell. And as most of you know, or should know, PowerShell is the new universal language that Microsoft uses in all its platforms. So it's common between all the Windows platforms, but also between all the Windows applications. Why is it because they were looking for a replacement of the CMD, the old DOS box, and something with a bit more possibilities. So first of all, it's object-oriented. It's very easy to read. There's a few catchphrases in there. Why? Because they use this famous verb-noun construct. For example, everybody probably heard of the commandlet from PowerCLI get VM. I don't have to explain what this does. I think it's obvious from the commandlet itself. It gets you a number of virtual machines. Second thing that they did from the beginning, there is always help built in. So one of the famous commandlets, or one of the first commandlets you should learn, is the get help one. If you don't know what a commandlet is about, or you're looking which commandlet does what I want to do, go for the get help space and then your commandlet. You will find all the parameters, the syntax, some examples even in there. So get help, that's the one that you should know by heart. It will help you enormously. What is an object? That is where most of the people that we see starting with PowerCLI have a kind of a problem. An object, in fact, a collection of data combined with some methods on there. Methods, consider them as functions. For example, you have a date-time object, which is quite obvious what it does. It gives you a date and a time. Now you can change that date. You have some methods on there like at X number of hours, at X number of days. So that complete collection, that date-time object gives you all that, and the data and the methods with which you can work with these objects. Like I already said, it's very simple to read. The first line that you see there on the slides, the code, everybody knows what that is doing. It will create a new VM on which ESXi host is also very obvious. Bigger environments, so you have to go into loops for each loops, or just very simple ones. In this case, we will make a new VM 10 times. I think somebody who never worked with PowerCLI, he sees this line. It's quite obvious what this does. You count from 1 to 10, and each time that your counter increases, you make a new VM. It's as straightforward as that. Again, like we stressed, it's a very simple language to read. Get data store is another example. It will tell you which data stores are available, and it will extract a number of properties. Remember I said an object earlier has data, these are called properties, and methods. And with the select object commandlet, you extract some of these properties. You can exactly determine what is visible on your screen, but also what goes to your files or whatever kind of output that you want. Now, the commandlets, they have been growing, the number of commandlets. We started off in the early days with about 60, 69, if I'm not mistaken. At the moment, we're at
over 370.
Over enormous amount. But still, if you know a bit about vSphere, it's an enormous environment as well. There are a number of functionalities, components that are not yet available as a commandlet. And that's where the getView commandlet comes in, and the extension data property. Through those two, you can still access all the objects that are available from vSphere. Even if there's no commandlet, the functionality is available to you in PowerCLI.
So we had another question from a guy in Switzerland, and he was wondering what's new in 5.5. We announced 5.5 today. So, as I said, this isn't a complete what's new session, so we're going to fly through this. There's another session on this if you're interested. We still have the same command, the same snap-ins, so you're still able to manage your vSphere environment, your image builder, your image profiles, all the stuff you would normally do with auto-deploy to actually get your hosts out there and deployed. You can manage licenses, VDS, vCloud Director, and also there's a separate install of PowerCLI if you use PowerCLI purely for hooking into a vCloud Director as a tenant. So the main enhancements that we've made are actually to do with the core commandlets, the main commandlets that manage vSphere, and also the VDS commandlets. In 5.1, we released some VDS commandlets which allowed you to do some core stuff within the vSphere distributed switch, and now we've extended on those to add more in there. One of the great things in 5.1 was tagging. If you're not on 5.1 yet, I'll forgive you for that one. But 5.5 is a really good release. It's one to go to, definitely, and it still includes the tagging. Tagging is something that's available via the web client and allows you to tag not only VMs, but also data stores and any managed object within vSphere. So we have now commandlets that allow you to work with tags. This is one of the things that our customers kept asking for, and we do a good job, I think, of listening to what the customers want and putting it in future releases. Maybe not the next release, but certainly releases after that. So managing tags now available via PowerCLI. As I said, VDS, we made some initial commandlets to work with VDS. Those people that were using VDS, they saw those, they thought, yeah, good, but I've still got this extra configuration I need to do. How can I do that? So they would either go through the extension data or use getView, as Luc said, that door through the API to do anything you like. But now we've actually made that easier. We've gone back and we've put more commandlets in there, things like being able to easily migrate from a vSwitch to a VDS. I have a demo of that in my What's New session. Being able to manage private VLANs, policies, ports, that kind of stuff. Some more of the advanced configuration that you would do. We also have another pretty cool commandlet in 5.5 that allows you to open the console. If you've ever been working at the PowerCLI console, to be honest with you, I no longer use the web client. I'm always in my console. I'm doing things in there because I can do it a lot faster than I can in the web client or in the C# client. But one of the things I always decided to jump out to was to actually open the VM console and do further work in there after I'd maybe created my VM and then wanted to go configure it. So we now have a commandlet called open-VM console window, which allows you to open a VM console window. So it'll instantly bring up a web browser and it'll open that console window, and you can use that to pipe through get VM and open multiple windows. You can also just return the URL. And in my What's New session, I have a cool demo showing you how to create a really basic GUI application that you can hand out to other people that allow them to just basically click a VM and open the console straight up. I know that's something that a lot of people have asked me for because they don't want everybody having access to the vSphere client and all of the wonders that are in there. We obviously have support for the latest and the greatest, so vCloud Director 5.5 support. And we also have a commandlet for host licensing.
Okay, those who know this guy, it tells a bit about your age, of course. But the next slide, please. What we'll do is, what we get quite often is give me some best practices as a general question. And okay, we mentioned some of those in our previous sessions, but for this sake, we just compiled them again. As a memento that you can fall back on. There are some very simple rules that if you follow those, that will help you enormously in the speed or the execution speed of your scripts. I'm not going to list or read them all there. You can see them. There's the variable thing. Use variables where possible. Use, of course, variables with a meaningful name, which is quite obvious, has nothing to do with PowerCLI. You should it everywhere. The help and the examples I already mentioned before. There is a new feature in 3 which you should actually look at, and I find it quite amazing and very useful, is the show window switch. You get the help instead of a dump of text lines on your console, you get the help in a Windows format, which makes it quite easy to select certain parameters in there and generate a commandlet or the line with the commandlet and the parameters that you want. So that's one to check out. Make it simple. Don't write scripts of 300 lines. Rather split those up in functions. If you have a specific function, because what is an advantage of function? You can reuse them later on. You will build your own library in the end, so that is something to watch out for. Splitting is a very strange word. I don't know who invented it, but it's a very useful feature. Most of you, if you use commandlets that have a certain number of parameters, your lines tend to become quite long. And it becomes quite complicated to read them. Now with splitting, you can put all those parameters and the values you want to pass to a parameter in a hash table. So you just fill that hash table before, and then you call the commandlet with the hash table instead. There's other advantages. You can easily, since it's a hash table, you can easily use methods that are available on hash tables to add parameters, to change parameters, to check if a certain parameter is there. So something to watch out. Okay, this is the example with the get events. It's always important to filter on the left. Okay, you see those 2 lines. They are the first one is an example of bad coding, between brackets, of course, and the second one is a better implementation of the same thing. First, limit the data that you want to use in the next command. That you know the pipeline construct, the vertical bars that you have there. You pass objects from one part to the next part. Make sure you minimize the number of objects that you pass along as soon as possible in your lines. So that's something that we see quite often And it can make a big difference in the execution speed. I don't know who put that line in there, but there's a number of sites on the internet, and it's not me only, but there are numerous sites available. So why should you reinvent the wheel? It's available. Most of the stuff is available or in the community or on blog sites.
How many people have been to Luc's site and stolen one of his scripts and altered it? I have. I know I have, yeah. There you go, that's why I put it in.
Okay, thank you. Next. This, okay, we're all animal lovers, of course, and there is a famous guy, also a PowerShell MVP, Don Jones, and he has a famous quote: if you use a right host, it is a command that exists, if you use a right host in your scripts, there's a puppy that will die every time you use it. So that's what the picture is. No, seriously, I know what he means to say. There are other ways of debugging or looking at intermediate results in your script. There are things like write verbose, there are things like write error. Use those. Write host is very specific for your console, and that's normally not where you want to collect your output in the end. You want to pipe it to a CSV file or whatever type of file. So remember, no write host, puppy goes away.
I can't tell you the amount of puppies I've killed. Don't quote me on that. So another friend of mine, of course, is Jennifer Aniston. You know, she's also in the community. You might not have seen her in there. She wondered how you run these scripts, and it's quite a common question that we actually see in the community because there are a number of ways to do this. So you might have a PS1 file, you might want to .source, you might have functions, you know, you might hear all these words and go, okay, what the hell does that mean? What we're trying to get across here is there are multiple ways to run your scripts, and you know, there's multiple ways to interact with PowerShell and PowerCLI. Some of the most common ways are indeed loading a PS1 file, which is the PowerShell file, where you've written the script, you've saved it, you've maybe published it on your blog, you've put it on a communities, you've saved it on a drive, you want somebody else to use it, you're saving it for later. So just open up the PS1 file in an editor, and then you know, use that and run that. Dot sourcing allows you to bring the results back into your current console. So that's a great way of running scripts. And also functions. You know, functions are fantastic. The first time I started looking at PowerCLI was when it was the VI toolkit, and it was back in the beta days. And I was going through doing all this stuff. You know, I was getting great results. And then I came across a stumbling block. So I actually sent Luc an email and said, you know, how can I make this better? He sent me this script back with a function. And it was the first time I'd seen a function. And I was like, what's he doing here? You know, this is magic. I have no idea what it does, but it's fantastic. Since then, I've read a bit about functions, and I suggest you do the same thing. You know, don't email Luc, because he might get a few emails, but functions are great for reusable code and for creating your own command-style ways of working with PowerShell. If there's not a way to do what you want to do at the moment, and you do it via getView, or you do it via some other PowerShell commandlet, or you do it with a bunch of PowerShell commandlets. Wrap it up into a function, give it a verb-noun, and next time you've got that for later on. Obviously, everybody's used the console. If you've installed PowerCLI, that's the first place where people normally go. You're used to working with that day in, day out, and just kind of, you know, messing around in there, doing your quick win stuff, the one-liners to produce the results you need. I mentioned script editors before. There's a bunch of script editors out there. Most of them are free. You know, use the script editors, save your files, and use them again. Scheduled tasks is another great way to run PowerShell scripts. If you want something, if you want the automation done on a daily basis, on an hourly basis, schedule it as a task. It's a great way of just getting it done, leaving it to it, and letting it do its magic all on its own. One of the ones that I like is the Vcenter alert action. So I don't know if you know, but within Vcenter you get these alarms. And one of the things you can do is you can say, when I get this alarm, do something. And not just send me an email or send an SNMP trap, but actually run a script. That's a great way of actually saying something like, when a VM powers on or when a VM is created, maybe go and run this script that goes and checks the VM to make sure it's completely secure in my environment. You know, I've got a bunch of hardening guide entries. Go and add these to my VM. Put it on a create VM alert. So every time a VM is created, it runs the script, it hardens the VM, and you know you've always got hardened VMs in your environment, no matter who creates them. There's a bunch of different scenarios you can do around that, but take a look at the alerts, because there's an alert for absolutely everything, so it really is open to your own mind. We've got robust PSS sessions in here. We're going to talk about those a little bit later, so I won't go through that now, but it's just something to keep in mind when you run these scripts. And another thing I wanted to talk about was Web Commander. Now, this is a future fling from VMware. We're going to break over to a demo so this thing doesn't get too boring and you don't die from PowerPoint. So we talked this morning in the keynote about having an app store and about everybody expecting all their IT systems to be like an iPhone nowadays, right? Having your own app store for everything you need and just being able to get those apps and process those apps and use those apps. And that's what people expect from IT now. And personally, I blame Apple for this. But, it's a good place to be, because we're giving people what they need. But wouldn't it be cool if we could do that for PowerShell? One of the questions I get a lot is, I've got these scripts and I want to hand them off to somebody else, but I don't necessarily want them to bring up a PowerShell console. I don't want them to be able to, run this. I don't even want to teach them how to run this. I just want to give them a nice web interface. They can click on a button like an app, and it does what it needs to. So this is actually an internal fling that was created by some guys internally that we are hoping to release on the VMware Flings site, which is a site where we release some non-supported stuff. And what they've done is they've wrapped PowerShell up inside of PHP pages. So essentially what you can do is you can have a bunch of apps or scripts, and you can put a nice front end to them, a nice little icon on them like this. You can see there's scripts in there for Vue, for SQL, for anything that uses PowerShell. And the ability to be able to actually click on those and run them for any vCenter. So if I click on this one here, which lists the data stores as a very simple example of a script, you can see it comes up with a form asking me, what do I need to feed into this script? So I'm going to feed in my virtual center. I'm going to tell it that I'm logging in as root. I'm going to give it a password. And I'm going to tell it to go away and do it. Once it's done, it will return the results to the screen. So we can go down. We can see the results. We can see how long it actually took. And you get the end results from the script, basically. So if this was creating a bunch of VMs, then that's fine. One of the great things about this as well is that you actually get a direct link so that you can run this again with the information you put in the form. You might notice that the password's in there, obviously, so there are some security things you have to think about when you use this. But if I paste that straight into the link, it's an easy way to hand out these scripts, It's an easy way to give someone the ability to do things within PowerCLI and PowerShell and actually just send them either the link to the website so they can click on the icon, or just send them a direct link. Tell them, run this, and you'll get what you need.
Okay. If you know who this woman is, I don't. In Europe, we don't know her, but apparently she's very famous in the US. What we get as a question quite often is my PowerCLI scripts are quite slow, and do you have any explanation why they are quite slow? There's a number of reasons why they could be slow. First of all, it could be the load on your environment. I don't know where you run your scripts. I hope you don't run them on the vCenter itself, because that's not really a best practice. But if you run them on a small machine, perhaps even running Windows XP with PowerShell v1 with 1 gig of memory, that's not the ideal environment either to run your PowerCLI scripts, especially if your vSphere environment is a bit bigger. So you will notice that you will have some performance issues when you do that on not so good environments. There are some differences in PowerShell version 1, version 2, version 3. Version 4 is in the preview already, as most of you know. In version 3, they changed some things with the just-in-time compiler. We're not going to enter into details, but it should make it a bit faster at least. There is a famous blog post on the PowerCLI team blog where they explain the use of the nggen command in .NET environments, which can allow you to make your environment faster. So in V3, they changed this complete behavior, and it should by default be a lot faster there. Now, there are several ways how you can do this. You can run remote sessions. Why run it on your small desktop where you normally only do mail and documents? Why not launch it versus or on a big workhorse somewhere in the background? There are a number of possibilities there. One of the new possibilities is, like Alan already mentioned, are disconnected sessions that appeared in PowerShell v3. We'll have a demo on that later on, so that is quite fantastic to do it. Now, one of the things that we also get, there are a few heavy fans of the get view commandlet. You probably know all of them by name. They are appearing in the, in the community, and if they give you a sample script or a few sample lines based on extension data and get view, the speed difference between those implementations and regular PowerCLI commandos is sometimes enormous, especially if you do this against a bigger vSphere environment. I'm talking about a few hundreds or thousands of VMs, hosts, and so on. Now, why is that? PowerCLI, and I think Alan already, or we should mention that, PowerCLI is a trade-off. You have these objects that live in your vSphere environment. They are very rich in properties and methods. Now, you don't want to see all of those in your PowerCLI session. So what the PowerCLI development team did is they extract a few of the important properties that they think you will need. It's quite obvious, for example, if you do a get data store, they want you, or they suspect that you want to see the name, the total capacity, what is used on that data store. But there are tens or even hundreds sometimes of other properties. They are not transferred, but compiling this new object, because it's a copy, it's a read-only copy that you get, compiling these objects takes time. So that explains a bit of the difference in time of getting an object directly via the get view extension data or via a PowerCLI commandlet. There are other ways to optimize this. And we listed a few here. You can, if there's a property that you absolutely want and is not available in the standard implementation of the PowerCLI command, you can easily extend that. How many of you have been playing with the new VI property commandlet? It's okay, not that many. Something that you should look at. It allows you to write your own small piece of code and map a new property in the PowerCLI, or the .NET objects as they used to call them, and you extract that from your vSphere object in the background. So you can easily extend what the PowerCLI development team made available to you. You can easily add things in there. That is one possibility. There's another possibility to make it faster on the get view, the one that you use to go to the vSphere objects. You can specify if you has to bring back everything or just a selected set of properties. That's with a property parameter. So start using that. Then another internal question that we had, this SDK reference, I jokingly said in the past you should have it on your, next to your bed and read it every evening for half an hour. Now, I know that's not realistic, but there's a lot of information in there. And do a search on there. Do searches on keywords. If you're looking for things involving migration, do a search on that reference guide. There's a lot of information available in there. Finally, I see a lot of people using Onyx, the Onyx project. Onyx, what it does is it intercepts the SOAP calls that your PowerCLI session or your vSphere client does towards the vCenter or the ESXi host, and it translates those SOAP calls into .NET PowerCLI code. Now, be aware if you do that. It is very helpful, but be aware if you do that, it's a translation of that specific call. So if you do a delete or remove VM in this case, it is for that specific VM. If you want to use it more generally as a function, you will have to do some rewriting of part of the code. So Onyx, okay, but watch out what you're doing in there.
So one of the other common questions that we get, not normally from Arnold, but is how do I export my information? One of the great things about PowerCLI is the ability to run the get commandlets and export the information that it returns. And there's a bunch of ways of doing that. You obviously have the CSV, the text, the XML, and you would normally export those to a file, maybe use the data later on or send it off. But there's also other things that you can use as well. There's functions been written by the community that allow you to export straight into XLS, give you not only Excel spreadsheets, but graphs within those spreadsheets as well. That's available on Luc's site, and it's the one that I always steal when producing my documentation. Another way to do it as well, or another way to get advanced information, is to actually collate it up and put it into a nice HTML format. Does anybody use the Vtech Script out there? I heard a woohoo then. That's cool. So the Vtech Script was something I originally wrote with a bunch of colleagues. We were working on a site, and every morning when we went in, we had one of these tick boxes where we had to go through and we had to say, okay, you know, are my data stores okay? Are they running out of space? No, they're okay, tick. You know, how many snapshots have I got? Has anybody created a snapshot and left it there for 3 weeks like they shouldn't do? No, we're okay, tick. You know how boring that gets? After about the third day, we were like, there's got to be an easier way to do this, you know. And the golden rule within PowerShell and PowerCLI is obviously, if you're going to do it more than once, script it. So we sat down and we started putting each one of these checks into a script. And this script has evolved over the years, and loads of people have got involved, and I've actually put it on GitHub now, so you can actually go down there and you can look at the code, you can contribute to the code, you can make it faster, you can put your own checks in, you can put your own additions in, and you can download it and run it. I did shoot a quick demo showing you how to do that, because a lot of people you know, find it hard to do that. And literally, it's very easy. And remember, everything in this session we've mentioned so far is absolutely free, including vCheck, right? So you can go to my site, you can go to the vCheck page, you can go down, you can see that there's vCheck for vSphere, Exchange, VCD, some other products which I won't mention, and you can actually go down and download the zip, download the latest version, and it will download the script file and allow you to run that. So now I've downloaded that, it's just a case of exporting it into a folder. And then I'll bring up, in the headers, you can actually change the image that comes up in there. You can customize this script. And, you know, I mentioned earlier, each one of these checks is now actually a plugin. If they're not relevant to you, delete them. It'll make that script that little bit faster. So if I drag and drop it into a console and actually run that script, the first time I run it, it'll come up with like a nice little startup wizard saying, okay, I've got all these checks. What do you want me to do? You know, I'm going to run it against your vCenter. Do you want me to send you an email at the end? Do you want me to display the results? What color do you want it? You know, how long do you want me to search back for snapshots? How big is it when you start to worry about your data stores running out of space? All that kind of information. And then once it's done that, it will go through and it will check your environment and it will run all the plugins one by one, checking your vSphere environment. There's a few errors in this script. I actually went back to GitHub and fixed those after this, so you won't get them. And then once it's finished, it will display a nice HTML report. And the idea behind this is, like I said earlier, you run it as a scheduled task, so that when you get in the morning, you've got this information in front of you. You don't have to do those checks. And it's free. Download it. Run it against your virtual infrastructure. You'll get some information back that you might not know. I went to one place and they were saying, no, we don't use snapshots. I ran this against it. They had a snapshot that was over 100 days old and was starting to kill a data store that it was on. And I was like, really, you don't use snapshots? And they were like, oh, I know that guy. I'm going to send him an email right now. So, you know, run this script against your infrastructure. If you don't like it, if it takes too long, feed back into the project. Put your additions in there. If you don't like it, throw it away. I'm not going to cry, believe me, okay? It's fine. But you might just get that little bit more information that you need. So, this is you. No. Performance data. So we've gone through some of the reporting, and what we thought was, you know, what else is out there, and what else do we want to talk about when it comes to performance and advanced reporting and the stuff that you guys need. So we came up with a few on our own. And there's some stuff out there already in the vSphere client. You can see it. There's the performance data in there. That kind of stuff is really easy to find and really available to you with PowerShell. And you know, creating your own custom reports and your own entities with that data is very easy. And I believe there's actually a book coming out on it at some time in the future. We'll mention that later. So think about the VM tools as well. There's great commandlets that you can use to actually reach inside the guest using VM tools or something that's installed in VM tools called VIX. It's a great way to pull that data. And there's also the guest OS metrics as well that you can use, the metrics that are about your VMs and how they're performing.
Mm-hmm.
As I said earlier, make sure you use the export to CSV or even export to XLS. It's a great way to get this information straight into a spreadsheet, straight into a graph, and send that off to your managers. These managers love graphs. And Luc has actually got a great script that he's written. We call it the Holy Grail because it's been asked so many times, and we've kind of got several different ways of doing it that work in kind of one way and then maybe not in another way. And then I believe you came up with this on the flight on the way over.
Here, yeah. So it's still very rough, but I'll show you later on.
The guy never sleeps.
What I have there.
So the advanced reporting, we're actually going to bring up a sheet on my laptop.
Okay, what I did is, we have this question, like Alan said quite often. You have your virtual disks, your hard disks, new hard disk, you attach a hard disk to a VM. Inside the guest OS, the OS that is running inside your VM, you can, suppose it's Windows, you can create multiple partitions, the logical disks. Now, we often get questions, how can I know my C drive, is that sitting on hard disk 1 or hard disk 2? My D drive, is that sitting on hard disk 1 or 2? There are ways of doing that. We even had one in our book that we published 2 years ago, but it's not foolproof. There's always a situation where you risk of missing a mapping between your hard disk and your logical partition. So while I'm busy with those performance data, like Alan said, on the plane over here, I came up with this idea. So it's very rough still, but you will see it appearing later on in one of our sites. What I'm doing is I'm generating I/O on one of the specific logical partitions. It's a very straightforward PowerShell script that you can launch inside the guest OS via the invoke VM script. Invoke VM script is your friend if you need to do something inside the guest OS. So what is important here, and I put a circle around it, is the drive, the logical drive where I submitted it. That's the E drive. So I generate I/O and I sleep 20 seconds between the two pulses of I/O that I do. Why 20 seconds? Anybody any clue? The performance manager, the real-time capturing of metrics is based on 20 seconds interval. So to avoid that your I/O bursts fall within the same interval, you make sure that there's at least one interval apart. So that's the first thing, the script, we generate I/O. Now, this will show you what comes out. At the top, that's a performance manager view from within Windows, whatever Windows. In this case, it was a Windows 8. You can monitor a number of performance metrics inside Windows as well. In this case, I looked at the disk time, percent of disk time. And as you see, this is based on your logical disk. Now, if you go to the bottom graph, and I hope it's a bit visible in the back of the room, if you go to your bottom graph, it comes from the Vcenter V client, where I monitor a specific V disk, hard disk. And if you look at the right, that red rectangle, there are two peaks of I/O. But luckily, in there, I'm monitoring not my logical partitions, but my V disk. So this, and you see the two peaks again at the top in the perform. That way, if you now do a bit of pattern matching, you can easily map your logical partitions to your hard disks. Like I said, it's still rough. There needs to be a function that comes around it, but this will be something that would be quite useful for a lot of people, since I had the question quite a lot of times.
Just proves that Luc never turns off, right? He's on the plane over here, he's still writing content for this. So one of the other questions that we get as well is, obviously PowerShell comes out with new versions as well as PowerCLI. So what kind of stuff can you take advantage of in the latest version of PowerShell that will help you in PowerCLI? And we've come up with a few ideas here, just a few things that you can use. We started using the common information model, I always get that one wrong, common information model commandlets, the SIM commandlets, to reach into the hosts. And it's just another information source that you should be aware of. Luc's got a demo of that in a moment, but that's a great way of actually finding out vendor information, because each of your vendors, if they're a good vendor, should be writing information into the SIM and allowing you to grab that information, things like hardware versions, service tags, all that kind of information. Robust sessions, we mentioned that a number of times. We've got a demo of that later on. I wanted to keep it in this slides because be aware it is a PowerShell version 3 feature that we make use of. So, you know, when you go back and you think, okay, I might want to use this, you'll have these slides and you'll see where you can use it. Another option as well is to calling a SOAP or REST API, and that's become a lot easier with PowerShell version 3. There's now commandlets that allow you to reach into a REST API and pull back that information. One of the examples I wrote of that is actually a vShield module. So you can actually hook into the REST API of vShield, and I've written a bunch of functions that look like commandlets around the REST commandlets that will actually return information about vShield. So it's like you're using commandlets to manage vShield, but really it's underlying using the REST methods within the API. And one of the other great things that's been fixed in PowerShell version 3, I know Luc's happy about this one, is the ordered objects. What used to happen with his Excel spreadsheet was you would get the objects that you wanted and you would get the properties that you wanted returned. You would pipe them through to the export XLS, and then in the Excel spreadsheet, they would show up in a completely different order. Well, they fixed that issue now, so this is, you know, it's a small thing, but it's one of those things that makes me happy.
Okay, for the sim demo, seeing the time, because it's a very straightforward video, it's just we're skipping to the next slide eventually here. That's in fact there's a function written around that invokes sim request. And the ESXi hypervisor, he provides sim smash information to your call. There is a manual available. I put a hyperlink in the slides. It contains numerous kinds of objects that you can find. What I did, and you see it at the bottom there, I don't know if anybody works with UML diagrams, Uniform Modeling Language. Okay? It's a way of representing architectures. So that's what I did is, the hardware that is available on your ESXi in this case was modeled just with square boxes and the relations. And on the right you see a detail. That is the kind of information that you can get out of these SIM interfaces that are available on your ESXi. And it's very easy to reach them through PowerCLI, thanks to the new version 3 feature. Like you can see, there are serial numbers on there, model numbers on there. As far as I know, you can't get these from calling directly to an ESXi. So this is added value. If you want to take an inventory of your computer room, use the SIM interfaces, query your ESXi hosts, your boxes, and you will find a lot of information this way from your hardware that you have in your computer room.
Okay, so we've mentioned this one a few times now, and you know, some of these things on the screen might be common questions from you. You know, things like, okay, I've started PowerCLI, I've run my Connect VI server, and it takes a long time to come back. You know, what can I do to make that faster? Or the first command that I run in my PowerCLI session takes a while. What can I do to make that faster? Things like aligning PowerCLI snap-in versions to make sure that they're all okay. You know, exceptions in big environments, these are common questions that we get. So we wanted to look into these and try and find a way to make them easier, make it easier for you guys to use PowerCLI, make it faster for you guys to use PowerCLI. I actually had a question from a customer a couple of weeks ago, and they were running a monitoring system that basically went out, ran a PowerCLI script, monitored a certain item, and then came back with the results as part of that monitor. And every time they did that, they were starting a new PowerCLI session, new PowerShell session, new PowerCLI session, connecting, run the command, get the results, return it back. And they were saying, you know, this is slow. Every time I do this, and I might do this once every 30 seconds, I've got to start this new PowerShell session. And is there any way I can make this faster? Luc came up with some great ways to do that.
And okay, in PowerShell 3, okay, we mentioned it several times already, they introduced something what is called disconnected remote sessions. And remote sessions were available already in PowerShell v2, but if you, on the client part, disconnected or stopped your PowerShell session, the remote session was gone. The server part was dropped as well. Now with the robust remote sessions, they keep it on the server part, and what is even better, you can reconnect to such a session. So our idea immediately was, seeing some of the problems that Alan already mentioned before, and I spoke about that as well. If we would have a big box somewhere where we could run all our PowerCLI scripts with enough performance, enough memory, enough CPU power, and it could avoid this overhead of each time setting up a new PowerCLI session. That would be ideal. So we looked into that. And in fact, we were able to accomplish this through the remote session. How do you find these disconnected remote sessions? There's a commandlet for that as well, get PS session. The connect PS session is quite obvious what it does. It reconnects again to such a disconnected session. There's a few things you should watch out for. It should be done with the same credentials as the original session was set up. But that's something that should be quite easy to implement. And there's another problem. Some of the well-known GUI environments like PowerGUI, PowerShell Plus, they seem to have a problem with that kind of session. So if you want to use it from within a GUI environment, I'm afraid you will have to go to the PowerShell ESA, the free one that is included since Windows 8 and Windows 2012, I think. How does it work? A little schematic. On the left you have your workhorse machine. In this case we used an example on a 2012 core. So you can make it a very optimal machine, no GUI, nothing there, just a lot of memory, a lot of CPU power. In step one, the one on the top right, we set up a number of these sessions. Very simple, we do a new PS session, we do one invoke to set up the session, and then at the end we do disconnect. So what we did is we scheduled this. Alan already mentioned scheduled tasks. We do this every morning. We kill the ones that are still available and we start up X number of new sessions. In this case, in the example you see 3 disconnected sessions on that server. Now if somebody comes in, one of our administrators, one of our system controllers, they have a number of scripts that they gotten from us. They will be able to connect to one of those 3 disconnected sessions and run their PowerCLI scripts without the overhead of setting up each time a new environment. So for this environment where they had to do this every 30 seconds, that is ideal. The session is already there. There's a few things to watch out for. We have a part in the code. The code will appear, or the functions will appear on the blocks later on. There is part that you need to do to set up the PowerCLI environment on these remote sessions. There's the obvious stuff in there. You need to include the snap-in for PowerCLI. You need to connect to the VI server, be it a vCenter or an ESXi. You need to change some settings in the PowerCLI configuration because these warnings, they interfere with the objects that come back. And then lastly, and that is to avoid, in some environments where we mentioned that earlier as well, you have this just-in-time compiler. First commandlet takes a lot of time. To avoid that, by setting up the session, we just give whatever commandlet there. In that way, your just-in-time compiler has run, and all the subsequent commandlets will be faster than the first one. There's one thing, if you don't run this on a 2012, this envelope size, it was changed in 2012. Now they put it on the right size, which is 1 meg approximately, 1 gig approximately. Before it was only 200 and something, and that gave you some problems if there were a lot of objects coming back from that session. But if you're on a 2012, you're safe, no problem there. We did record a small video that shows you how this is working. It is quite obvious. There's nothing world-shocking or dramatic. It's just the concept that behind this that is very interesting. Like you can see at the top, we have 3, I hope you all see it, but I'll just tell you, there are 3 functions that we've written. The first one sets up such a remote connection, a robust remote connection. The second one is the one that allows you to query which ones are available. And the third one is my emergency brake, because while I was testing it, I was sometimes having remote sessions that were not responding whatsoever anymore. And the disadvantage is you can't use the session commandlets to kill those. So I had to fall back on the WMI interface to abort some of the sleeping or hanging sessions. What we're doing here is quite simple. We call this new PS session thing for 3 times. So we set up those 3 sessions. So there's a parameter that allows you to give how many. Then once we have those sessions, we disconnect it. We connect again to one of those. That's what we do with the connect PS session. Then we do an invoke. So we just send a command or a commandlet or a script even to one of these remote sessions. It's executed. The result comes back as an object. That's an added advantage. It's not text that you get back. It's real objects that you get back. What I'm doing in that black window at the top there, I'm monitoring, or I was monitoring the PS sessions on that workhorse. So you see there's at the moment 1, so it will check every 2 seconds, I think. It will check how many sessions there are running on the server. That's our famous 2012 workhorse. On the left, we have the script that is now setting them up. We already are 2. He's going to set up in a minute the 3rd one. Now, once they are running, all 3 of them, that's this moment, now we have 3 remote disconnected sessions running on that server. Now we go through the rest of the script. We will see how it will find them by doing the get, then do a connect and an invoke. And at the end of this demo script, we kill them all off again. We stop all the sessions, and you will see them disappearing in the window that we have running on the Windows 2012 server. That's about it. One thing to see here, we mentioned that before several times, this first command that can take quite a bit of time. Even the connect VI server takes a bit of time. Those are the things that you avoid with this kind of session. So you do this only once in the morning when nobody is in yet, scheduled. So you avoid at least 40 seconds in the standard normal environment. First command at 5 seconds. You avoid all that, so your scripts in the end will become a lot faster. If you need to run, like Alan said, a script every 30 minutes, this is the amount of time that you will save on each run of those scripts. Now, we have a lot of people that are doing kind of auditing tasks or want to find out what is happening in their environment, and the basic source for all that is events. As luckily, the vSphere environment, vCenter, keeps track of all the things that happen in your environment. For most of the actions, most of the methods, there is an event that was recorded somewhere in your database. There's a couple of things that you should watch out for. First of all, you have to keep those events in your database. You can disable that in such a way that none of them will be kept, that you throw them away immediately. So that's the first condition. Make sure that they are kept for a reasonable amount of time. Disadvantage is this will take a bit of space on your database where the vCenter is running. Events, there are 3 types. Most of them are the simple ones are the event kind of objects. They are documented quite straightforward in the SDK reference. There are 2, and I think this has grown historically, there are 2 that are diverted from those 2. This is the event X and extended event. They were created to provide more functionality that was possible in the standard event object. Okay, if there are a number of posts on that, so if you need more information, please read up. It will take us too far here to explain that on stage. There's a few things to watch out for when you use this getVI commandlet. There is a built-in limit of 100 events that are returned. So if you're looking for the events of the last day, make sure that you increase that parameter a bit. As you can see at the last line, the thing that I most of the time do is I just take the theoretical maximum that can be stored in an integer, which is a quite handy function. Also watch out, the getVI event doesn't work recursively. So if you run this against the data center, it will not automatically include all the VMs living in the data center. So you have to make those, specify those explicitly. You can use, of course, we'll skip that one. You can use, of course, the API that is available to look at the events. And that's what we did in one of the functions. We call it getVI event plus. The function is available. Since this does a lot of the filtering inside the call, so what type of event that you want, the start and end dates, it is done on the vCenter. So it's a lot faster. And most of the measurements we did, we saw that it was about 80 times faster than the classical getVI event. That's the one I think we will only do the 3rd one.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, this question that we get related to events, how do I find out which event I should use? Now, we always came back with the reply, read the SDK reference, but we know that this is not your favorite literature probably at home. So we came up with the Eventomatic, which shows 2 things. First of all, that it's easy to create a GUI based on PowerShell, that's what we did. And what this thing does is it's quite straightforward, because all the information of the events that are available on an ESXi or on a vCenter are described in objects in the vCenter or the ESXi. And on top of that, they contain a description. So what we did is in that script, we just pulled out that information. So first you will have to connect to whatever. In this case, it was a vCenter. And then he will show you in the window at the left there, all the events that are, there are about 1,100 on the standard vCenter, no extra components. So now you have all these events, the names, with those names you can look for them in the SDK reference, except for the ones that are extended events. But what you can do is, and I hope you get that now, there's a way of looking at these things. So we made a pop-up. If you hover above one of these events, you immediately get the description that was kept in the vCenter environment with that event. So that is already quite useful. Secondly, we added a search functionality. So if you want something that is related, in this case, to scan or vMotion, or it could be whatever you want, just enter that, click search, and it will only show, and 29 in this case, only show the events that contain that keyword, or in the name of the event, or in the description of the event. You can select a number of these events once you've found them. They will appear in the right side window. Just by clicking on them, they will go over there. If you click on the right side, if you made a mistake, you can go and click over there, and they will be removed from the selection window. Now, why do we have this selection window? What we'll do is, and that's something that you will see at the bottom there, we will allow you to generate a PowerCLI statement with a getVI event to find those events exactly as you selected them on this Eventomatic GUI. One thing that we should probably add, there's no way, if you use this for the first time, the code that is generated is available in your clipboard, so you will have to paste it somewhere in a notepad. That's what we're doing here. So the line is quite long because there's a number of selection criteria in there. But as you can see, it became quite simple now to generate your getVI event commandlets with all the parameters required. And on top of that, we included the feature to do it via the much faster getVI event plus function. You just click that select box, do a new generate code, and if you now paste it from the clipboard, you get the statement, the call to the function with the required parameters, and this will fetch your events that you selected there.
That's a great way of getting the information. I always get questions about how you look at the events, how you work out what the events are called, how you return those. So that is a really good tool, and I think a lot of people are going to use that. You know, we're running short on time. We could have done with like 2 hours for this session, to be honest with you. We just had so much stuff we wanted to jam in here. But, you know, we figured a lot of people are attending, so it's the kind of stuff they might want to see. How do we take this stuff further? We've been through a lot of this already within this session, but, you know, don't just rely on VMware's commandlets. Don't just rely on Microsoft's commandlets. There's third parties out there writing commandlets as well, PowerShell commandlets to integrate with their infrastructures. People like Dell, people like HP, NetApp, you know, storages, servers, everything is coming out with PowerShell commandlets nowadays, making it really easy to integrate all your stuff together and come up with the results that you need. And for those that don't have the commandlets, there's the REST API. Just use the commandlets that we talked about earlier in PowerShell version 3. When we talk about further automation, there's obviously a number of different ways within VMware to do further automation. I liked this diagram that was on a blog article by a guy from VMware called Andy Troop. And he actually talked about the different types of automation within VMware and using those. And you know, it's a great way of actually looking at things because, believe it or not, there's already a lot of automation within VMware software that we take for granted every day now. So, you know, have a think about the stuff that's already out there and definitely read the article. I'm not doing it justice here on stage. So where do I go now? Go to the communities. You know, this has all been about the communities. This session is about the community. You are the community. Feedback in, help people out, ask questions. If you have any feedback on PowerCLI, I'm right here. I love taking feedback back to the developers. They love that kind of stuff. If we're not doing something right, if we're doing something slow, if there's something else you need, let me know, please. I want to include it. We want to make your life easier. And remember, PowerCLI is free. You have a bunch of takeaways from this. I think you're going to take away a lot. I want to leave time for questions. We've included a bunch of links. You will get the slides as part of the VMworld.com log on. You will see the videos on there as well, so you can go back through and maybe pause it a little bit so that I'm not talking so fast. There's a bunch of books out there that you can purchase, and there's a new book coming up as well, written by Luc Deakins, and that's specifically going to be on performance reporting within PowerCLI. That's one that I'm going to get. And finally, we are at the Q&A. I do apologize, we did miss a few demos. They'll all be on the websites. We'll make sure that we blog these in, and if you have any comments, please do tweet them. I've got some books to give away, so make sure you include the hashtag for our session today. I have no idea who that is on the screen. Don't ask me. Any questions?
There's
yes.
one over there.
Talk about the web commander.
The web commander, yes.
When you brought up the icons and the script,
Yep.
when I send that to somebody, or send them that link,
Yep.
do they have to have PowerCLI installed to run that?
So the question is, do you have to have PowerCLI installed on the client if you send someone that link to run that script? No, you do not. PowerShell is actually installed on the web commander server. So anything you run is going to run from that server. They don't need to have anything. They just need to have a web browser. So, yep. You're welcome.
Okay, thanks for attending.
Thank you very much.
Much appreciated it.